The wind had been howling across the Wyoming plains all evening, slipping through every crack in Cole Briggs's old ranch cabin. The place had been standing since long before he bought the land, weathered and scarred, and no patch job could ever quite keep the draft out. By now, he barely noticed. 3 winters alone had taught him to live with the sounds of an empty prairie night. Most nights he sat at the table, stitching tack, rolling smoke, or squinting at a worn book by lantern light until his eyes burned. But tonight, he'd turned in early. Heavy clouds had settled at sundown, the kind that promised a cold would bite harder after dark. Cole lay stretched out on the cot against the far wall, one arm tucked behind his head, the other hanging down near the rifle stock that rested within easy reach. His hat was tipped over his face, but he wasn't asleep. He rarely was, not this early. Sleep never came easy. Too many years of living light, always listening, ready for trouble. That habit had kept him alive back east when men came hunting him. Now it just kept him company in a cabin that felt too still when the wind died. At 39, Cole was worn lean from long days and leaner winters. His work jacket, once blue, had faded nearly gray, cuffs patched more than once. His boots sat by the door, and the revolver hung on its peg beside them, never out of arm's reach. Life here was simple. Mend the fences, tend to the herd, ride the lines once a week, trade for supplies when needed. No surprises, no company, not this far from town. That's why the sound hit him hard. At first it was faint, the soft scrape of feet outside the door. Not the wind. He knew the weight of a body when he heard it. He went still, every muscle drawn tight, listening. Then came the groan of a porch plank under pressure. Cole swung his legs off the cot, hand curling around the rifle. He didn't raise it, just rested the barrel across his knees and waited. The latch didn't rattle. The door didn't burst open. Instead, a pause, long enough for the wind to fall silent. Then came the softest creak, the door giving way. Someone had slipped inside. Bare feet touched the cold floor. He rose, rifle heavy in his hands. Who's there? Silence. He stepped far enough to strike a match to the lantern. It's his cutting the dark. Light flared. Shadows leapt across the walls. That's when he heard the cot creak behind him. He spun, rifle half raised, and saw the lump under his blanket. Not just anyone, a woman. She'd slipped under the covers in the blink of an eye, curled tight against a far wall like a trapped animal. Cole's pulse hammered. Out, he snapped, voice low and sharp. She flinched but didn't move. The light caught her face. Young, maybe 24, bronze-skinned, wild black hair falling around her shoulders, cheekbones sharp. Apache. She was barefoot, her feet raw and blistered, one ankle swollen. Her dress, or what was left of it, hung ripped down the front, streaked with dirt across her collarbone. The hem was torn high at the thigh, dry blood staining the fabric. She carried the smell of smoke and sweat, the kind that clings after running for days. His first instinct was to drag her out and shove her back into the cold. This was his place, his cot, the one corner of the world that was his alone. Strangers had no right to walk in and lay claim to his blanket. But she didn't beg, didn't try to explain, didn't even hide. She just stared at him with wide, dark eyes, not pleading, not defiant, waiting, and that stopped him cold. If she had begged, he could have hardened. If she had lied, he could have turned away. But she didn't either. She only sat there, tense and quiet, shoulders ready to spring if he moved too quick. Cole muttered a curse, lowering the rifle. He grabbed an extra wool blanket from the chair and tossed it to her with more force than he meant. "Stay put," he said gruffly. "Don't touch me." Her trembling fingers caught the blanket, pulling it around herself as she curled tighter to the wall. Cole turned back, let the lantern burn low, and sat on the cot's edge with the rifle across his knees. For a long while, he just stared at the cold stove, listening to the wind and to her breathing. It wasn't fear that sat in his chest. It was something harder to name. She was trouble. That much was certain. Nobody showed up like this without a story that could drag danger to his door. He could send her away come dawn, wash his hands of it all, and return to the quiet that had kept him alive this long. But the image of her split feet and bruised arms gnawed at him. Whatever she was running from had already taken her to the edge, and he wasn't sure he could be the one to push her the rest of the way. Whatever had driven her into the night had already stripped her down to bone in sheer survival, and Cole Briggs couldn't bring himself to finish what the world had already started. When he finally stretched out again, his rifle stayed close at hand, every sense sharp, counting each of her breaths until the wind outside swallowed them both. Sleep was scarce, and for the first time in years, Cole wasn't sure he even wanted it. Dawn crept in gray and bitter, a light that made everything look colder than it was. Cole woke before the sun cleared the horizon. Habit, same as always. His eyes drifted first to the far side of the cot. She was still there, a small bundle under the blanket, dark hair spilling in tangled ropes across her face. For a heartbeat, he thought she might have slipped away in the night. Then she stirred, a faint sound escaping as she pulled the blanket tighter. Cole swung his legs off the cot and rose, joints stiff from a half-sleepless night. At the stove, he stirred the ashes back to life and set the tin coffee pot over the flame. The hiss of water on metal filled the silence, grounding him in something familiar. He needed that. The rich smell of coffee drifted through the cabin. She sat up slow, still clutching the blanket tight, her eyes locked on him, alert, wary, but not panicked. "You're still here," he muttered, half to himself. She said nothing. Cole poured 2 cups, set one within her reach, and took his own seat. "It's hot," he told her. She hesitated, then inched forward, blanket slipping enough for her feet to touch the floor. The instant her weight pressed down, he saw her wince. Up close, the soles were split, raw, some cuts deep enough to bleed again. "Sit back down," he ordered, harsher than he meant. "You'll tear them worse." She froze, then pulled her legs back, curling under the blanket again. Cole exhaled, set his cup aside, and dug into the chest by the wall. He came back with a small tin of salve, crouched low, and placed it between them. "Hold still." She didn't move at first, eyes steady and unreadable. Then she shifted, baring her battered feet. Cole worked in silence, dabbing salve on the worst cuts and wrapping them in strips torn from an old shirt. Her skin was cold against his calloused hands. When he finished, he stood and tucked the tin away. "You stay inside today. Let them heal." No answer, but she didn't look away. Cole cooked a pot of beans, set a bowl in front of her. She ate slow at first, like she wasn't sure it was truly for her, then faster when she realized he wouldn't take it back. When the bowl was empty, she pushed it toward him and whispered, "Isla." Cole looked at her. "My name," she added softly, tapping her chest. He gave a short nod. "Cole." She repeated it under her breath, testing the sound. The day passed in uneasy quiet. Cole stepped out to check the stock, hammered loose boards back on the barn door, cut more wood. Each time he returned, she was there, by the fire first, later crouched with his mending kit, sewing clumsy stitches into the torn fabric of her dress. The bodice was pulled together now, though it still gaped at the collarbone. Mud flaked from her arms, streaking her skin like war paint. Cole leaned against the doorway, watching. "Where'd you come from?" he asked finally. She didn't look up. After a pause, her accented voice answered, "South." "Anyone after you?" His tone was flat, but the question was sharp. Her needle stilled. She gave one small nod. Cole felt the knot in his gut twist tighter. Trouble, just like he figured. "You can stay," he said slowly. "But if they come, you do what I tell you. Understand?" She met his eyes for a long moment, then gave a single nod. That night, Cole gave her the cot and laid his own bedroll by the door, rifle within arm's reach. He didn't trust her yet, not fully, but he couldn't throw her back into the cold either, not with feet that torn and men possibly hunting her. As he laid down, her steady breathing filled the cabin. Against his better judgment, he felt some of the tightness ease from his chest. For the first time in years, the place didn't feel so empty. The wind died overnight, leaving a hard chill and pale sky by morning. Cole rose early, quiet so she stayed sleeping, stoked the stove, then stepped outside with his coffee. The yard lay empty except for cattle huddled along the fence. No dust trails, no riders. For now it was just them. When he came back in, Isla was sitting up on the cot, the blanket drawn around her shoulders. She braided her hair into a rough plait, and in the morning light, she looked a little less like a shadow. Her feet were still wrapped, but she had managed to scrub the worst of the dirt from her arms and face using the wash basin near the door. "Use more water if you need it," Cole Briggs said, nodding toward the bucket. She glanced at him, then dipped her hands, rubbing cool water across her neck and collarbone. Her skin was sun-darkened, scattered with fading bruises turning yellow. Cole turned away, busy himself with beans left from the night before, but the sight lingered in his mind. After they ate, he checked her feet again. The cuts were closing, though still raw. "Short steps only," he warned. "Don't push it." She gave a small nod and, to his surprise, began pitching in with chores. She limped heavily at first, but stubbornly refused to rest. She carried kindling to the stove, swept the floor with a short broom she found near the wall, stacked a few clean dishes neatly by the basin. Cole watched her for a while, hammer in hand, as he worked on a door hinge. "You've done this before," he said at last. Her eyes flicked up. "Work." "Keeping a place," he clarified. Her mouth tightened. "Family gone," she answered, then turned back to the broom. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd offered him before. The words settled deep in Cole. Whatever she was running from hadn't just left her bruised and barefoot. It had taken everyone she had. Later, with the sun high, she crouched by the fire sewing again. This time it wasn't her dress but one of his shirts, patching a sleeve torn by barbed wire. Cole leaned in the doorway, watching her hands move. Her stitches were crooked but steady, and she frowned each time the needle stuck. He found himself asking, "You handle a needle often?" She shrugged. "Mother teach me." "Not good." She held up the uneven seam. "It'll hold," Cole said, almost smiling before he caught himself. The rest of the day passed quiet, but not the same strained quiet as before. She began moving around the cabin like she belonged there, though she never strayed far from the fire. Toward evening, Cole saddled his horse to ride the northern fence line. Isla stood in the doorway, watching. "You stay inside," he told her. "Bar the door till I'm back." She frowned faintly, then nodded. When he returned an hour later, the lantern glowed, and the door was bolted just as he'd ordered. She unbarred at his voice and stepped back to let him in. A pot of beans warmed on the stove, the fire fed, without his asking. They ate at the table, passing salt and bread, without words. It felt different. Afterward, Cole set his rifle on the table and began cleaning it. Isla sat cross-legged on the floor, watching calmly. After a while, she asked, "Men coming?" "Not today," Cole said. "If they do, I'll know." She nodded once, then fell quiet. "Why do they want you?" he asked finally, voice even. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Not want me, want take back." "Your people?" he pressed. She hesitated, then shook her head. "White men, not mine." That explained the terror in her eyes the night she had slipped beneath his blanket, and why she hadn't turned back south. "You'll stay here until your feet heal," Cole said firmly. "We'll figure the rest after." Something in her shoulders eased. She pulled the blanket tighter and sat closer to the stove. For the first time, Cole caught the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. Later, as he banked the fire, she didn't climb into the cot right away. She stayed by the warm coals, sewing until her eyes grew heavy. When she finally lay down, she didn't curl quite as far from him as before. Cole lay awake, listening to the wind and the soft rhythm of her breathing. For a man who'd lived years with nothing but cattle and silence, it was strange having another soul in the cabin. But it no longer felt like an intrusion. It felt like the start of something he wasn't ready to name. The next morning broke bright, but biting cold, frost glazing the troughs and grass. Cole rose early as always and found Isla already awake, blanket around her shoulders, watching the fire burn down to embers. "You sleep?" Cole asked, pulling on his boots. She shrugged one shoulder, then lifted her gaze. "Enough," she said, voice low but steadier than before. He nodded and busied himself with coffee. As it boiled, he set out a little jerky with the last of the bread. She joined him without waiting to be asked, sitting across from him instead of keeping her distance. A small shift, but one he noticed. After breakfast, he checked her feet again. The cuts were closing well, swelling nearly gone. "You'll walk better today," he told her, rewrapping the cloth. She offered the faintest smile. "Good," she whispered. The morning drifted by in silence as they worked side by side. Cole Briggs split logs out back, while Isla gathered the smaller pieces, stacking them neat beside the stove. When he stepped back inside, he found her wiping the table with a damp rag, then rearranging tools and jars on the shelves as if she meant to set things right. She wasn't just passing time anymore. She was claiming the space, shaping it into her own in small ways. By midday, Cole saddled his horse and motioned toward her. "Ride with me. Slow, just a south pasture." She hesitated, then nodded. He lifted her carefully onto the horse behind him, mindful of her healing feet. They rode under a pale sky, the cold wind cutting across the open land. She sat tall, hands light on the back of his coat. Cole stopped once to tighten a loose wire in the fence. Isla stayed quiet, scanning the horizon like someone trained to watch for danger. When they turned back toward the cabin, she asked softly, "No men?" "Not today," he answered. Her hands eased against his coat, shoulders dropping slightly. Back home, she helped him unsaddle the horse, shook the dust from the blanket, and carried it to the rail. Her movements had grown more sure, less guarded, and Cole found himself watching her longer than he should have. That evening, after supper, the cabin smelled of beans and wood smoke. Cole sat at the table, cleaning his revolver, the task so familiar it left his mind free to wander. He thought of how she'd sat the horse that afternoon, how she'd looked over the yard, as if memorizing every inch. He had half expected her to bolt once she could walk, but she hadn't. She was still here. When he put the revolver away and turned, she was sitting on the cot, knees drawn up, watching him. "You should be by the fire," he said, surprised. She shook her head. "Not cold." Cole lingered, then crossed the room and sat beside her on the cot. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. "You planning to stay?" he asked at last. Isla lowered her eyes to the floor, then lifted them again. "If I can," she said simply. Something loosened in his chest at those words. "Then you stay," he told her. The corner of her mouth lifted, the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her since she arrived. She shifted nearer, slow and careful, waiting to see if he'd push her away. He didn't. When her head came to rest against his shoulder, Cole sat still, letting her stay. The fire popped. The shutters rattled in the wind, but for once that old tension in his chest was gone. When she finally lay down, he stayed sitting there until she slept, listening to her quiet breathing. Later, he banked the fire and stretched out beside her, keeping a respectful space yet close enough to feel the warmth of another body. Sleep came easier that night. For the first time since she'd arrived, Cole didn't dream of war or empty rooms. The thaw crept in slow that week, days warm enough to soften the ground, nights freezing hard again. The cabin smelled of damp earth and smoke, and Cole kept the fire burning longer to chase away the chill. Each morning, he found Isla already awake, blanket around her shoulders, hair loose down her back. She moved with purpose now, no longer waiting for him to tell her what needed doing. She swept the floor, shook out the bedding, stacked kindling before he even pulled on his boots. One morning, while she wrung out a rag at the table, Cole caught himself just watching, the curve of her back, the way her hair swung as she bent forward. He turned away quick, grabbing his coat and stepping outside to clear his head. The yard was muddy, clinging to his boots as he walked the fence line. Each post reminded him the world beyond hadn't changed. Men were still out there, and if they came, the fight would be his. When he came back, she was crouched by the fire, sewing a patch into the knee of his work pants. She looked up, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. "You work too much," she said quietly. He gave a short grunt, almost a laugh. "Somebody has to—" Her lips curved slightly before she bent back to the needle. That night, after supper, Cole sharpened his knife, while Isla brushed out her hair by the fire. She had washed it earlier, and it hung long and damp, shining in the lamplight. The room felt too quiet. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly, the words surprising even him. Her hand stilled on the brush. She turned her head toward him. "Where go?" "Back south. Maybe find what's left of your people." Her gaze dropped. "No one left," she said softly. "All gone." Cole set the knife aside. "Then stay here until you decide different." She nodded once, as if that was enough, and returned to combing her hair. When it came time to bank the fire, Cole hesitated before spreading his bedroll on the floor. He had given her the cot every night since she arrived, but something in the way she had looked at him lingered. "You can take the cot," Cole Briggs said at last, nodding toward it. But Isla only shook her head slowly, then surprised him. She stood, crossed the room, and sat down on one side, leaving space as if to invite him. Cole stayed rooted for a long moment. Then he blew out the lantern, set his revolver within easy reach, and crossed the floor. He stretched out on his side of the cot, careful not to brush against her. The air between them felt charged, warmer than it should have been with the cold leaking through the log walls. After a while, Isla shifted beneath the blanket, turning toward him. Her hand brushed against his arm, light as a breath. His heart kicked hard in his chest, but he didn't move away. "You're safe," she whispered, voice so soft it nearly vanished in the crackle of the stove. Cole turned his head, catching her eyes in the faint glow. "So are you," he answered. They lay like that a long time, the silence no longer strained but thick with something he hadn't felt in years. When he finally slept, it was deep and dreamless. By dawn, she was still there, curled close enough their shoulders touched beneath the blanket. The day began quiet. Cole chopped wood while Isla brewed coffee, neither speaking of what had passed between them. But that night, she didn't wait for him to offer the cot. She sat on it as if the decision had already been made. This time, when they lay down, she didn't leave that small gap. Cole let his arm fall across her waist, slow, ready to pull away if she stiffened. She didn't. Instead, she shifted nearer, her forehead resting against his chest. For a man who had lived too long with only his thoughts, the simple weight of her there felt like something he hadn't known he was missing. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin there was only the fire's crackle and the steady sound of her breathing. For the first time, Cole didn't dwell on the men who might come down the trail, or on the years lost of grief. He thought only of the fact that she was here, and she was choosing to stay. The next days fell into rhythm. Cole worked the fences, hauled wood, and checked the herd each morning. Isla kept the cabin warm, cooked steady meals, mended whatever needed it. When he returned from the cold, she was always there, quiet but present, moving with purpose. He never spoke of her sharing the cot now. It had simply become what they did. At night, when the fire burned low, she lay close enough that he could feel her breathing. Sometimes he woke before dawn to find her hair spilled across his shoulder, her hand resting near his chest. He no longer pulled away. One evening, after hauling brush in the creek bed, Cole came in bone-tired, shoulders stiff. Isla sat by the stove brushing out her hair. The cabin smelled faintly of stew and pine smoke. "You eat," she said simply, nodding toward the bowl on the table. He did, quietly, his eyes on her as she worked the brush through the last tangles. Her hair hung long and straight now, nearly to her waist, lamp-like catching bronze skin and the neckline of her mended dress. Afterward, he sat on the floor near the fire, scraping mud from his boots. Isla set aside the brush and crossed to sit opposite him. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Just thinking," Cole replied. "What about?" He hesitated, then said, "What'd I do if those men showed up again?" Her face tightened. "They come back." "Not yet," he said, shaking his head. "But if they do, I'll be ready." She was silent a long while, then asked, "You fight for me?" He looked at her closely, seeing that her question wasn't just about guns and danger. It was about trust. "I will," he said simply. Something shifted in her eyes, relief breaking through. She moved closer to the fire, warmth spilling across her skin. "Why stay?" Cole asked quietly. "You could head for town. Or west. No one would stop you." She shook her head. "Town not safe. West not safe. Here safe." Her gaze held his steady, making it plain this wasn't just a shelter she'd found. It was the place she had chosen. Cole let out a slow breath. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that until now. The fire cracked, the room too quiet. Isla edged nearer, her knee brushing his. Cole didn't move. She hesitated, then touched the back of his hand lightly. His fingers curled around hers without thought. They sat in silence. Fire snapping, wind moaning through the shutters, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Then Isla leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't rushed, not timid either, just soft and sure, carrying the taste of smoke and stew. Cole froze a moment, then lifted his hand to her cheek, his rough palm warm against her skin. When she pulled back, her breath came fast, her dark eyes locked on his face, as if bracing for rejection. Cole Briggs didn't turn her away. Instead, he kissed her back, slower, steadier, until the tension eased from her shoulders and she softened under his touch. When they parted, Cole leaned his forehead against hers, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You should sleep," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. Isla gave a small nod, her hair brushing against his jaw. Together they banked the fire, then laid down on the cot. This time Cole didn't leave that empty gap between them. He drew her in close, his arms settling around her waist. She didn't hesitate, resting her hand lightly against his chest. Cole didn't sleep right away. He stared up at the ceiling in the faint glow from the stove, thinking about what had passed between them, and about the way of the promise he had made, that if men came, he would stand. Morning took him to the north pasture, where the ground told its own story. Tracks, fresh, pressed deep, not his horse. 2 riders had passed through, heading west. Cole crouched over them, jaw set tight. Someone was still hunting. When he returned, Isla was bent over the fire. She looked up instantly, reading his face before he even spoke. "Tracks," he said flatly. Her grip tightened around the poker, but she stayed silent. "We'll be ready," Cole said firmly. She gave one sharp nod, and when he sat to pull off his gloves, she came to his side, her hand brushing his shoulder in quiet trust. That night, when they lay down, there was no hesitation at all. The next morning broke gray and still, the kind of silence Cole never trusted. He stood on the porch with his coffee, scanning the far trail, while Isla moved steady inside, her braid draped over her shoulder as she worked. She had become part of this place, the way she ordered things and kept them steady. Then Cole saw them, 2 faint specks on the trail, moving slow. His gut tightened as the shapes grew into riders. He opened the door. "Isla," he called, his voice calm but edged with steel. She appeared instantly, reading him before he spoke. "Men," she said. "Yes, 2. Her hands clenched the doorframe. "Same, could be." He expected her to retreat into the back, but she only nodded once. "I stay." Cole held her gaze a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Bolt the door after me. Don't open unless it's my voice." She obeyed without a word. Cole stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The air felt colder, heavy on his skin. At the gate, the riders slowed. The older one, with a trim beard and a worn coat, raised a hand in greeting that didn't match the flint in his eyes. "Morning." The man called. Cole didn't move. "You're a long way from town," he answered flatly. The younger rider shifted in his saddle, eyes scanning the yard. "Apache girl," he said. 24, maybe? You seen her?" Cole's grip on the rifle didn't waver. "No one here but me." The older man's mouth bent into a thin curve. "Funny, we heard different." "You heard wrong." The silence stretched. Cole knew Isla was listening just beyond the door. He felt the weight of her presence. "You mind if we look around?" The younger one asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I do," Cole shot back. The 2 men exchanged a look. The older one spat into the dirt. "She stole something. Doesn't belong out here. You're not helping yourself by keeping her." Cole stepped off the porch, rifle leveled, not firing, but making his point clear. "Trail runs that way," he said, nodding toward the open plain. "You ride it, or you ride back the way you came. Either way, you leave my place standing." The younger rider shifted like he meant to argue, but the older one laid a hand on his arm. After a long pause, he gave Cole a hard stare, then tugged his reins. "This ain't over," he warned. Then you'd best be ready next time, Cole answered. They turned and rode off slow. Cole kept the rifle raised until they dwindled into specks on the horizon. Only then did he lower it, his pulse still hammering in his chest. When he opened the cabin door, Isla stood in the middle of the room, fists tight at her sides. "They gone?" she asked. "For now," Cole said. She stepped forward, gently taking the rifle from his hands and setting it against the wall. Then, without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Cole froze for a beat, then exhaled long and low, his hand resting against the back of her head. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "I know," Isla whispered. Cole Briggs held her until the tension bled from both their shoulders. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were dry, steady, no longer those of a woman ready to flee. "I fight too," she said simply. Cole studied her a long moment, then gave a single nod. "All right." The day moved in uneasy silence. Cole cleaned his rifle, checked every round, and stacked cartridges where they could be grabbed quick. Isla moved with quiet resolve, honing the kitchen knife on a whetstone, binding her hair tight as if preparing herself for the storm. That night, when they lay down, she didn't just curl near him. She pressed close, searching for more than warmth. Cole wrapped her without hesitation this time, his hand brushing the length of her braid, as if to swear he would not let her be taken. Sleep came late, but when it came, it was deep, the kind that follows a choice made clear. By morning, Cole had the horse saddled early. He showed Isla how to work the spare rifle, guiding her hands until the motion was sure. "When they come back, you stay inside," Cole said, "but you keep this ready." She nodded, gripping the rifle firm. When she set it down again, she stepped close and kissed him, not the hesitant touch by the fire, but steady, certain like a vow. Cole leaned his forehead against hers, breathing in the mix of smoke, soap, and stew on her hands. "Stay," she whispered. "I will," he answered, realizing for the first time that he wanted to fight if it meant keeping her here. The next afternoon the wind rose, hissing low through the cottonwoods. Cole was stacking wood in the yard when he spotted them. 2 riders on the trail again, moving faster this time. He stepped inside, voice clipped but calm. "They're back." Isla already stood by the table, the rifle propped against her chair. Her braid was tight, her face set. She asked nothing, only nodded, taking the rifle and slipping into a corner where she had a clear line to the door, yet kept herself out of sight. Cole walked back out and waited. He didn't call to them this time, just let them ride close, dust settling heavy in the yard. The older man reined in first, his face harder than before. "Told you we'd be back," he said. Cole braced the rifle across his arm. "And I told you to keep riding." The younger rider shifted in his saddle, his hand brushing the butt of his pistol. "She's coming with us. You can step aside, or you can stand in the way." "She stays," Cole said, voice flat. The air grew taut, carrying only the horse's breathing and the creak of leather. Then the older man swung down, boots crunching in the dirt. Cole's thumb pulled the hammer back, with a click sharp enough to slice the silence. "Don't," he warned. The man froze, eyes narrowing. "You'd shoot a man over her?" Cole's jaw hardened. "Try me." For a long beat, no one moved. Then the younger one cursed low and wheeled his horse. "Let's go," he muttered. The older man glared one more second, then spat into the dirt and swung back into his saddle. "You just bought yourself trouble, Briggs." Cole didn't blink. "Then be sure you're ready next time." They turned and rode off slow. Cole held his rifle steady until they were only specks on the horizon, then lowered it, his pulse still hammering. Inside, Isla stood in the center of the room, rifle tight in her hands. Her grip was firm, but her eyes wide. "They gone?" she asked. "For now," Cole answered. She crossed quickly, setting the rifle aside, then stopped before him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she cupped his face in both hands and kissed him hard. Cole let the rifle slide against the wall, his arms closing around her. This kiss was different, urgent, desperate, full of all the words they hadn't said. Fear, relief, the raw truth that they might not have had another chance. When they broke apart, she stayed close, breath quick, palm still against his chest. "They come back?" she asked. "They might," Cole admitted. Her chin lifted. "Then we stay ready." Cole nodded. "We will." That night the cabin felt warmer than it ever had, though the fire burned no brighter. Isla climbed into the cot before Cole had even pulled his boots, holding the blanket open in silent invitation. He joined her, lying on his side, facing her. For a while they just looked at one another in the dim light, the fire crackling steady. Then Cole reached out, rough fingers brushing along her cheek, down her arm, slow and sure. When she didn't pull back, he kissed her again, softer this time, and she met him with quiet certainty. The rest unfolded naturally, wordless, as though the weeks of silence had been leading them to this moment. It was slow, gentle, marked by the same careful respect Cole Briggs had shown Isla from the first night. He let her stay. When it was over, they remained close, breathing in rhythm with the quiet of the cabin. Cole rested his forehead against hers, his hand resting over hers on his chest. "You're safe," he murmured. "With you?" she whispered, her lips curving faintly against his shoulder. Cole closed his eyes and let the words sink deep, filling something inside him he hadn't realized was empty. Outside, the wind had stilled, leaving the night heavy and calm. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel like mere shelter. It felt like home. The morning after the riders left, Cole was already outside before the sun broke over the ridge. The ground was frozen stiff under his boots, the sky a pale wash of blue. Rifle across his shoulder, he walked the fence line, eyes sweeping the trail. The quiet felt too deep. Inside, Isla had already coaxed a fire alive and set coffee to boil. When Cole stepped back in, she was at the table, rifle within reach. She watched him, waiting. "They'll come again," Cole said. She nodded once. "Then we ready." The day turned to preparation. Cole stacked fresh wood near the cabin, checked each cartridge twice, and worked oil through the rifle until the lever clicked smooth. Isla cooked enough beans and bread to last several days should they be pinned inside. She didn't move like a guest anymore. Her hands worked with the same ownership as his. This was her home too now, and she guarded it with equal resolve. By late afternoon, the wind had risen, carrying dust across the trail. Cole spotted riders before they reached the gate. This time there were 3. He opened the door, his voice low. 3 now. Isla's face stayed steady. "I stay." Cole stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, waiting. The men rode straight into the yard, hooves pounding until they pulled up within shouting distance. The bearded one swung down first, boots hitting dirt with intent. "This is your last chance, Briggs," he called. "Hand her over, and we ride out clean." Cole shook his head once. "She stays." The man's jaw hardened. "Then we'll take her." The younger rider moved to swing down, and that's when Cole fired. The round bit into the dirt by his boot, dust spraying. "You try," Cole said, voice cold as iron, "and one of you won't ride home." The man froze where he stood, eyes narrowing on him. The bearded rider's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't draw. Cole didn't blink. "She's not yours to claim. Ride out and don't come back." Tension hung thick. Then the bearded man spat into the dirt. "Come on," he growled to the others. "Ain't worth it." They swung back into their saddles, turning their horses. "This ain't over." The man threw over his shoulder. Cole stood steady, rifle still leveled. "Then be ready next time." He shot back. The 3 riders pulled away, hooves pounding, until there were no more than specks on the horizon. Only then did Cole lower the rifle, shoulders easing for the first time in days. Isla stepped out onto the porch, rifle still in her grip. Her breathing came fast, but her hands were steady. "They gone?" she asked. "They're gone," Cole said. "For good, I reckon." She lowered the rifle slowly and leaned it against the wall. When she turned back, her face broke into a small but certain smile. "They not take me," she said. "No," Cole answered, stepping closer. "Nobody will." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She leaned into his touch, then wrapped her arms tight around him. Cole held her close, the silence no longer heavy with fear but calm, the kind that comes when danger passes. That evening they sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink over the open land. The sky bled gold into red, then purple as the stars came out. Cole's arm rested around her shoulders, her head against his chest. "This your home now," he said quietly. Isla's hand found his. "Yes," she answered. "Home." Inside, the fire burned steady, the lantern light warming the cabin. When they laid down that night, there was no hesitation, no space left between them. The world outside had been held at bay, and for the first time since she aged, he kissed her slow before sleep, and she kissed him back, her hand pressed firm over his heart. Morning broke clear and calm. Cole stood outside with his coffee, watching the horizon blush with first light. Behind him, Isla stepped out barefoot, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and came to stand beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The land stretched wide before them, and for the first time, it felt wholly theirs.